Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Today we're going to unbox, review, take an in-depth look at a new signature artist guitar that Gibson just released. I think it was like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. This is the Lukas Nelson Signature Les Paul Jr. So I'll be honest, when this thing was first released, I was like, who's Lukas Nelson? I've never heard of this guy before. So just a little bit of background info on him, just in case you're in a similar boat as me. He's part of the group called The Promise of the Real. And he's worked with many of artists, including Lady Gaga, Neil Young, and they're kind of like a country rock band. So not necessarily the type of music that I generally listen to, but interesting stuff nonetheless if you are interested in it. But what absolutely blew my mind was when I found out he's the son of Willie Nelson, you know, the Willie Nelson, Trigger and all that stuff. So when I found that out, it's like, oh, okay, I guess I'm glad I bought this guitar, because at first I just thought, you know, it'd be a quick little video. It's pretty easy to talk about the differences between this and the new original series that Gibson did of the Junior. Because I literally just found that news out while I was doing a little research before I unboxed this. That way we had some talking points. So first off, I want to talk about a few new things that I'm seeing just right here before we even open this. That Gibson box, look, they actually have the Gibson custom headstock on it. Whereas the old one, they had the custom binding right there, but they didn't put the emblem on the headstock. And I figure, you know, if they're making thousands and thousands of these boxes, surely it would save them some ink just to put that on there, because they don't have to print anything. You can also see that they have the addition of the fretboard right there. So cool, we got a box change, and this case is looking absolutely brand new. I have not seen this before. They're kind of square latches. You've got one that locks. You know, at first I wasn't digging this, but now that I've actually felt one, I'm okay with these. I'm wondering if this is the next batch of the Made in China cases. But anyways, let's take a look at this guitar. Okay, all right, this is kind of interesting. So the biggest difference between this one and like the original collection is A, it's a little bit more expensive. Those guys are $14.99 and this one's $15.99. But what kind of confused me is, hey, we've now got an artist signature on this. I would expect it to be at least $300 or $400 more expensive. So the biggest differences between this and an original collection comes down to our finish here. It's a satin finish. Now I was expecting something really cheap and nasty, but this is definitely that kind that's actually pretty nice. You could polish this up into a high gloss if you wanted to. And what's kind of interesting, they've actually given all of the hardware kind of like a VOS treatment here. I was not expecting that, like they've slightly pre-aged it. We'll see that closer on the workbench. But besides just the finish, you're going to notice something here on the headstock. They actually have the correct strip style Kluson tuners on here. So this is really reminding me of like the Billy Joe Armstrong run of signature ones, where it's like the equivalent of a Les Paul Classic within the Junior lineup. So it feels a little bit higher end than most of the normal ones. And I believe they put a slightly special bridge on here. They gave it all that nickel hardware. And they basically just modeled this after that guy's 1956 Les Paul Jr. that he got around 2013. So that means another difference will be your speed knobs here. So first impressions of this thing, nice chunky neck. So if you like the chunky necks, you'll definitely like this one. Looks like our fretboard could use a good condition. They've got his signature right there on the truss rod cover. So I'm curious, did they give us one that we could swap that out with? They normally do. Okay, all right. So that answers the question on the case. It looks like they're going to Costa Rica. Because for a minute there, they were going with the Made in China cases, and I think that rubbed some people the wrong way. This is very similar in feel to those, except for I would actually say this has a little bit more padding, and I like these much better than those other latches. So we'll just take a quick look at this case candy. Looks like you get a baby photo, and all your usual stuff here, like your pre-pack checklist, the strap. I really think Gibson should redo this strap. It's just so cheap and nasty. I don't think anybody actually uses those. But wow, I'm surprised they did not include a regular truss rod cover on this. Usually they do. But we do get the multi-tool at least. But cool, as far as a one pickup Junior goes, I mean, you kind of got to weigh your options if it's worth the extra $100 to you, because in the end, yes, it is cheaper for Gibson to produce these satin finishes. But at the same time, as a player, I generally prefer the satin finishes, so it's kind of like a choice that you have to make whether it's worth it or not. But let's go ahead and throw this one on the workbench and take an individual look at its parts and specs, and we can talk a little bit more about it before we get to a playing demo. Inside the Lukas Nelson Les Paul Jr., everything taken off, here's what we've got going on. There's no additional routes underneath that pickguard, it's just secured by 3 screws, and then you get this route for your P90 pickup. Inside there reads LPJR for Les Paul Jr., Lukas Nelson, 2020. Nothing too crazy or special going on with this thing, it's just a standard route. And as far as the pickup itself, it's just labeled as P90 dog ear. It's braided wiring. They chose to mount it to the body the dog ear style, meaning it has these little tabs, whereas soap bar style would not have this and it would secure to the body with screws in there. That's what those additional holes are right there. So you could potentially modify it, but that's why they have this type of cover over top of it, the dog ear, because of these little tabs. Now just a little bit of trivia for early Les Paul Juniors. The very first ones actually have maple bodies. I would love to see a maple body Les Paul Jr. reissue. But since this is a 56, they're going after the mahogany. But you're still within that era where Gibson used too short of bushings within these. So sometimes these vintage ones will get cracks forming right here. People will have to touch them up because you'll get something called post lean. Now, obviously, this reissue, it's not going to have that. They're going to use the correct style ones. But that is something to know about the earlier Les Paul Juniors. I think it's 57, 58 when they finally corrected that for the single cuts. And then in 58, they started to transition into the double cutaway style. But the bridge on this one, I was surprised to find out this is a Tone Pros part. This is a pretty nice upgrade as compared to what comes on the original collection Junior. And you can see instead of like a hard lightning bar type design, they've got just a little bit of compensation right there. And that's because intonation on Juniors, you don't have a traditional bridge tailpiece setup, so it's a little bit harder to fine tune these things, but they wanted to get them as good as they can. So we'll see how that goes. But that's pretty much the meat and potatoes here. You just have a master volume, master tone. Once again, you've got your speed knobs, which are correct for a 56. Honestly, you can get a few different styles in this year. But you're going to notice one thing you're missing as compared to like a historic version of one of these, no thumb bleeders. So you don't have the pointers telling you where you are. As I was saying when I unboxed this, I was really expecting like an open pore, really cheap satin finish, but this is what I call like the semi-gloss, where if you took some time to really buff this thing out, it would turn into full gloss, so you can't actually feel that wood grain. Meaning, if you were a little bit turned off that these things had a satin finish like I was, I wouldn't worry about it too much. It's not as jarring as you would think it might be. But here's your pickguard. It's got a little plastic thing that I'll probably take off. Nothing too incredibly special here. But I don't think I've seen another Gibson USA product where they age the screws on these things. I mean, all of them look like the VOS stuff that they use in the custom shop. Even the bridge has been aged. That's a nice touch. And your metal output jack plate. And the pickup itself, it looks like it's reading 7.87 k ohms. There's no fancy push-pulls or double coils to get rid of the hum or anything. It's just a simple basic Les Paul Jr. Moving on from the mahogany body, mahogany neck with a rosewood fretboard, 22 medium jumbo frets with acrylic dot inlays. Fairly basic stuff here with the 12-inch radius. Depth of 43.4 millimeters, and at the 12th fret, 53. First fret neck depth, 23.8 millimeters, and 25.4 by the 12th, so that's like an even inch. And here's our scale length. As far as the headstock, once again, you get the special Lucas sign truss rod cover. No offense to the guy, but I'd probably prefer a regular one and had his signature on the back like they did on the Billy Joe Armstrongs. And you've got the Les Paul Jr. silkscreen and the silkscreen Gibson logo here. As far as QC and defects, so far the only thing that I really saw was right here by the nut. You can see there's an area where it kind of slopes in where it goes to the nut. It's not a huge deal, but something to know about. And for the pickiest of picky people, the white plastic tips actually have a pinkish hue to them that Gibson's kind of been known for. But since we don't have any binding, we don't have to worry about the fretboard being chewed up or anything. So far, I'm actually pretty happy with what we found. Now, if you get really close in here, you can see it's at least a 2-piece mahogany body, so it's not a single slab like the vintage Juniors. And this guitar has that static thing going on, so pardon all the dust. It just wants to absorb all of it all over this guitar. As far as the control cavity goes here, we have an orange drop capacitor on your tone and 2 Gibson branded pots. Not the neatest soldering job I've ever seen from Gibson. But on the edge, once again, the output jack is metal. And you've got your strap buttons in all of your usual locations here. Moving on to our mahogany neck, it's got that correct shelf right there. And this is just a big, huge, beefy, chunky neck. And when you strum this thing, you really feel the vibrations throughout the whole thing. That's one of my favorite things about good Les Paul Juniors. I'm sure some people would attribute the thinner satin finish to a better resonating guitar. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. But take a look at these tuners. Gibson Deluxe. I like the new font on that. That's cool. You can still tell it's a modern part, but it still looks very vintage. That's cool to see them bring that back. But the Made in USA stamp, and here's our serial number. So this was a 2020 made one on the 198th day of the year. First batch, 130th in production. Now you're going to see dealers quote, there were only 200 made, only 200 made. I doubt it actually goes within order of that. I mean, I guess it could. That's a production number, but not necessarily just for this. But directly from Gibson, I asked him, how many are you making of these things? The first batch was 200. So if they never make another batch, yes, there were 200 made. However, they do have plans to make at least one more batch. So we'll probably have anywhere between like 400 to 600 of these. I think they were just really gauging the market with this first one. So we'll see how they sell and what the future values of these things hold. So far, personally, I don't see anything that was unique enough to make this highly collectible in the future. Sure, it being a 56 reissue is kind of interesting, but it's not historic specs or anything. But as far as brand new pricing goes, it's not atrocious. It's very appropriately priced for an artist signature model from Gibson USA, in my opinion. But as far as being ultra collectible in the future, I kind of doubt it, but it's a nice limited run anyways. So 7 pounds, 13.1 ounces on this one. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how this P90 sounds. Now that we know all about the Lukas Nelson 56 Les Paul Jr. from Gibson USA, what are my final thoughts on this thing? It's got some good points and it's got some bad points. The good news is I think they've differentiated this particular version enough against the original collection Les Paul Jr. because it's got some cool unique specs that they haven't necessarily done before, like the bridge being really close to the pickup. And the reintroduction of these style of tuners is great. So if you're in the market for a brand new Les Paul Jr., definitely maybe A and B comparison shop one of these. If you were going to be purchasing a brand new Les Paul Jr., I would probably say go with this one because it will have a slight collector value in the future. Whereas they're just going to make as many of the original collection ones as they can possibly sell. But in general, I really don't suggest buying a Les Paul Jr. brand new. I mean, $1,500, $1,600 for a single one pickup guitar. I mean, I can't really justify that unless there's something, super special about it. And in my opinion, this one doesn't quite have that factor. If you want a really good Les Paul Jr. for around $1,500, I would still suggest the old Billy Joe Armstrong signature models. You get a really cool leopard print case with them. You get 3 different finishes to choose from. They were an all gloss finish. They had a special P90 that had hum canceling abilities. Those are juniors that have left a lasting impression on me. This one, it was okay. Maybe it's just because it's a new guitar, it's not quite worn in yet, but it didn't really blow me away. But I enjoyed checking it out anyways because, hey, limited edition Gibsons, that's what I like to document here on my channel. Troglodytes, thank you for tuning in today and learning about the Lukas Nelson signature Les Paul Jr. Doesn't look like we've got too much going on for the blacklight test here, but don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.